to introduce Dustin. I feel like I ran into him maybe 10 years ago. He's been in the nonprofit sector for at least that long. In 2023, he founded Yes Knoxville because we didn't have a dedicated organization committed to making the city better through education and reform. Reform on zoning and planning, which he knows a lot about, and those are his passions. The mission of Yes is to make Knoxville more inclusive, affordable, and freer by providing more choices in housing, transportation, and public spaces. So, without further ado, please welcome Dustin Durham with Yes Knoxville.
On. Yes. Okay. As Ben introduced me, I have a lot of rules because I have no chill. First, a disclaimer. At any given point in this presentation, I may get overexcited and drop some curse words. I will try not to, but I am very, very passionate about this subject. Pop quiz. You don't have to answer this out loud, but I always like to start presentations with pop quizzes because I find that it is a way to wake people up, especially after a break. What is a place? I know that might sound a little weird of a question, especially at a placemaking summit, but when I was putting together this presentation, I realized that if we want to understand placemaking, we have to really go to the core of what are we making, right? We're making a place. Well, what is a place? I'm a word nerd, so I referenced the dictionary, and when I was referencing what a place was, I realized that the key difference that we need to understand is what is a place versus a space, right? In our language, we will often use them as synonyms. You'll probably hear me mistakenly use the word space today instead of place. I'll probably, hopefully catch myself, but there is a difference and it's important. So space is the dimensions of height, depth, and width within which all things exist and move. So go ahead. In other words, it is nondescript, it is non-standoutable, it is ununique, it is just kind of there. It's everything, everywhere, all at once, right? It is anywhere USA. The way that we have been designing our communities, our neighborhoods in America the last 80 plus years have been spaces, not places, right? This could be in Knoxville, this could be in San Diego, this could be in Toronto, Canada. This could be anywhere in the US. This doesn't just apply to where we live, it also applies to where we shop. Places like Turkey Creek, which are anywhere in the United States. If you've never seen an aerial of Turkey Creek before, you would know this isn't Turkey Creek, right? I lied. Because it looks like anywhere else in the United States. It's not a place, it is a space. Space merely exists, and it is ruining us. Carol hit on this, and I already told her we're going to be best friends. And she's made it harder for me to not curse, because good Lord, that was a good conversation to have. It was a good presentation, but space is just here, and it's ruining us. It is the way we've designed our cities has made it so we cannot naturally build communities. We have separated ourselves so much, okay? We have stopped building places. Well, what are places? Places are a particular position. It's a point in space. It's a portion of space available or designated for being used by someone, right? A place is something that, in other words, it's specific. It's distinct, it's rememberable. It is more than just there. It is something that is one of a kind. There are a lot of things that can make a place, as we've already heard and will continue to hear. Here are a few examples, and I am using this partly as a travel blog, so bear with me. I got to go on vacation to Scotland back in the fall. This is in Edinburgh, Scotland. This is a very, very place-specific neighborhood because of nature, right? Nature is one thing that can make a place. This creek that runs through this distinct neighborhood made it different than the other neighborhoods in Edinburgh. So one of the things that can shape and make a place is nature. Travel blog. Got to go to Paris last summer for the Olympics. Architecture has been mentioned. Architecture can make a place a place, right? Notre Dame. I have a background in architecture, that's what I studied at UT, so when I saw this building for the first time, I did in fact cry a lot because of this idea that people gave to this place over hundreds of years. They designed this, they built this knowing they would not see it completed, right? It defines the island it's on in the middle of the Seine River. Architecture can make a place. Infrastructure, we might not think about this, but infrastructure can make a place. One of my best friends got married a few years ago in the city of Medellin, Colombia. And because they are a massively mountainous community, a lot of the poor communities have gondolas as their system of public transportation, right? Imagine this, going by Honeybee in South Knoxville, right? Like, that is a very specific place, distinct from anywhere else I've ever seen. So infrastructure can make a place. Place can be made by reclaiming something. This is in Miami, this is the underline, right? We've started to see a lot of cities have started to reclaim space under, for example, their interstate system. This is actually an elevated rail in Miami, but they have started to make it so that there are basketball courts, there are playgrounds. You know you're in Miami because of the branding, because of the way that they've designed it, and it has been something that has been roundly accepted by the community because they have taken something that was otherwise dead and reclaimed it. Place can be temporary. This, I would love to see more of these in Knoxville. This is in Boston. It's a pop-up plaza. So obviously this street was already a place. It had distinct architecture, a distinct street width. But the people in Boston, a few folks got together and said, hey, what if we just for a week had this pop-up pedestrian plaza, right? Similar to how now downtown here, we closed down Market Union Streets for the weekend and it's pedestrian only, right? It's something that place does not have to be a permanent thing. It can be a temporary measure, okay? Art, I'm a big fan of art. I'm a local muralist, so obviously we can use art, and I'll talk a bit about this later, but we can use art to make space. See, I did it. Not space, place, whether it's temporary or permanent. And then little interventions. This is in Dublin. They had recently closed down this street and made it a pedestrian plaza. And I just love these little benches / planters that they had everywhere. So you can use tiny little interventions to make a place, right? Again, similar in nature, but not quite. Things like fountains, water features. This is in Lyon, France. This is also something that, especially in Europe, a lot of traditional town squares have kind of a watering hole where people can gather. These are all just examples of ways that things that can make a place, right? But more importantly than knowing what makes a place, we have to ask ourselves, what makes a great place? This is the Project for Public Spaces. If you don't know them, I highly recommend you familiarize yourself with them. But when it comes to making a great place, they have this really convenient graphic. I want to focus on the 4 big chunks, though, is that basically to have a great place, it has to be sociable. You have to have you have to program it. You have to have different uses and activities. It might sound silly, but you have to make it comfortable, and then you have to be able to access it in different ways. The way my brain works is, how do we look at this, though, as the opposite? What makes a bad place? So the opposite of that, then, is if it's not accessible, that means it's a place designed for the car, not for the human body, transit, or bikes, right? Cars take up so much space, and I think anyone intuitively who goes on vacation to a great city will say their favorite place is not the parking lot of the Buc-ee's, right? It's going to be a pedestrian-focused space. So you can't design good places around the personal vehicle. It can't be single use. You have to have a mix of uses. You have to have I always say it's the 3 B's. You have to have your butcher, your barber, and your baker, right? You have to have different things so that people are always coming and going, right? There's a concept of, you have your New Yorks, right? They're your 24-hour cities. But then you get to smaller cities like a Nashville, Memphis, and Knoxville. They are 18-hour cities, right? So maybe most people aren't doing anything from midnight to 6 a.m. But you have to make sure that your good places, have things for families, for older folks, for younger single folks to do things at different hours of the day and night. It can't be out of scale. You can have a place that's big and grandiose, but the details have to be focused on us, our human bodies, right? We cannot design something that is out of the human scale, or we're not going to feel comfortable. And if we're not comfortable, why would we be there, right? And then again, it might sound counterintuitive, or it might sound basic, rather. It can't be boring. It can't be unfriendly. If it is something that is designed to look like a prison, we're not going to want to be there as people, right? We have to have places that are friendly. So then the question becomes, how do we make more places? Obviously, that's our goal today, is to learn how we make more places. And the reality is there are many individuals that make places. We've mentioned some today: architects, urban planners, folks like that. But really what is needed is champions. We need champions. Shout out to the Hoosiers. We need champions, and to quote my great friend Edward Mercury, we are the champions. And so what I mean when I say we, well, obviously everyone in this room has a part to play. But for this presentation specifically, I'm talking about Yes Knoxville. That is the we I'm talking about. Yes Knoxville, has been said. It's a nonprofit I founded a few years ago. I'm the executive director of. And basically what we are is a nonprofit that wants to reform Knoxville, make Knoxville better, create more places through housing, transportation, and public space reform, right? We understand that to have better community, to have these places where we can meet people who are different than us, who can build these social ties that can make our city stronger and better for everyone, we have to look at something that a lot of people don't find sexy, but is the reality of what shapes our city, and that is zoning and land use, right? I joke with people that my goal is to make land use and zoning reform sexy in the way that Hardee's commercials were in the 2000s. Because if you're unfamiliar, those were like scantily clad women eating a burger, and as a very gay man, I still wanted that burger, right? They were very well done commercials. So we need to make zoning that sexy. We need to make people understand how much land use affects their everyday life. So we say yes to these three simple things. We want more freedom in our housing, in our transit, and we want more community and civic spaces near home. How do we do that? I know I'm running out of time, so I'll go quick. So we've got a table over there, we've got brochures you can take, but we have a few campaigns. So the first one is our home campaign. It's helping our missing middle expand. Basically, it says that if you want to have a vibrant place, you have to have more people, right? You have to build your city for the people that live there now, not the people that lived there in theory 80 years ago. 90% of my generation and 60% of baby boomers, so millennials and boomers, the two biggest generations in U.S. history, want multifamily in their neighborhood. The fact that we do not have the ability to legally build a duplex in every neighborhood in the city is atrocious, and it is not serving the people of today. We need to change our zoning so we can build a duplex in every neighborhood. We have the Build campaign, which is better utilization and land development. I'm a huge slut for acronyms, so I'm very proud of that one. So this is basically saying, and if you're a designer, you know about this, but you have arbitrary parking requirements for everything you build, and there is no, it's complete nonsense. One of my favorites is like for a bowling alley. If in Knoxville you're building a bowling alley, the law might say you have to provide 2 parking spaces per bowling lane. But in Maryville, it might be 3 parking spaces per 2 bowlers, right? It's completely pulled out of people's asses. It makes cities less walkable, less transit friendly, less affordable, because the average parking space costs like $15,000 or something. It's absolutely insane. And if we lowered that, if we got rid of the mandate for parking and left it up to designers and communities, we can make our cities more sustainable, more affordable, more walkable, more transit friendly. Speaking of transit, this campaign is just, we need more budgets, a better budget for our bus. I'm the chair of the Transit Authority, so I help vote on the bus routes and stuff. And if you want to get people out of cars, you have to give them an option to do something else. So we've got to have dedicated funding for our buses. We've got to have good bike lanes. Speaking of which, we have the RAISE campaign, which is just saying, if, as an example, if studies show 80% of people won't use a bike lane if it's not protected and they don't feel safe, why in the hell are we continuing to build unprotected bike lanes, right? It's a waste of taxpayer money because we're building things that 80% of people won't use. This is exciting. We have a new campaign. We're trying to bring Amtrak back to Knoxville. Because we believe that everybody should be able to travel to cities close by like Atlanta and Nashville and not have to worry about driving because trains are fucking cool. And then the one that's most appropriate today is the Place campaign, pedestrian linkages and commons expansion. If you don't know, the commons is just an old term for public space, right? I'm a firm believer that every neighborhood in this city deserves to have their own version of Market Square. Even if it's super tiny, everybody should have a third, what they call third space, near their house where they can go and just exist. Just build community, not have to be a consumer, and we want to see that all over town. Okay. So things we do some work with certain studios at the UT College of Architecture. We'll host them and show off some of their projects. We do this thing every year called Design Slam, where we give this random prompt to people, give them an hour to design at like a bar. There are judges, people can come and see kind of what they designed. Last year we designed like an imaginary plaza at the south end of the Gay Street Bridge before it opened as a pedestrian bridge. I was excited about this. We did a cat crawl, so we did a bar crawl on the bus. We showed people how to take the bus around town, had people redesign bus shelters. We talked earlier about parklets. There's this thing downtown every year called Parking Day, where a lot of architecture firms and teams will design parklets. It shows what space can be if we design for people, not for cars. And then the thing I'll close out with that, Carol also said, placemaking, yes, it builds community, but it needs community to work best. I have a good experience with this. Again, I'm a local muralist. If you helped. If you know the Knoxville Museum of Art, it's just like over there. There was this big new concrete ramp leading up to a playground. It was really ugly, and so I was able to get a grant and paint the first painted crosswalk in town and also the ramp. But what made it the most exciting for me is I had a community paint day. So I had asked people to come. We put it on social media, and I wanted to make sure people understood that this is not just art for you, it's art by you. Right? Because when people have a stake in their community and making it better, they're then more energized to defend that place, staying beautiful and staying there, right? And I'm not gonna lie, it was really nice having some free labor. But it turned out really nice, and that's the thing that I'll close with is that, we would love for you to get involved, especially with BS Knoxville. We're very new, give us money. We're just excited to be here as a new nonprofit helping in the Lord's work of building place and building community. Thanks.
Good job, Justin. Wait, is this work? Is this on? Wait a minute. Yep, there it is. Okay. Good job, Dustin. I didn't know that I literally did not know that you did the mural next to Fort Kidd in KMA. I always wondered about that. I liked to hear you talk about how the work of getting the placemaking done, like with that mural, can perform that social infrastructure of building those bridge ties that actually, when we work together, I bet there were a lot of strangers that met one another on that day just doing that small project, providing that free labor. Okay, I'm excited about this next panel. I'm not excited about these long introductions. An MC dreads a panel discussion because that's 3 different people you got to introduce, and I've got it here on my phone. So here we go. But I did get a chance to meet all 3 of these panelists, and the work that they're doing and have done is really exciting. First off, Elizabeth Wells. She's the Regional Outreach Liaison at the Thrive Regional Partnership. She's a community revitalization and economic development strategist who specializes in turning bold ideas into grounded, lasting impact. With nearly a decade of experience across both rural and urban Appalachia, she's led revitalization initiatives, built multi-sector partnerships, and secured millions of dollars in transformational public and private investment to support place-based, people-centered growth. Kathleen Nolte is the program director for arts and culture at the Lyndhurst Foundation. An artist and art appreciator, Kathleen believes that access to the arts is fundamental to humanity. She also understands the power of working with artists through a creative process to advance other social causes. While based in Chattanooga, Kathleen particularly enjoys her work on community-driven creative initiatives in small towns across the region. And Jules Downham draws on over a decade as the artistic director of an acclaimed immersive arts organization. Jules brings a unique ability to translate narrative, environment, and audience engagement into strategic, emotionally resonant experiences for brands, organizations, and communities alike. With a background in cultural anthropology, her work is guided by a deep understanding of how people create meaning through rituals, spaces, and shared moments. At Understory, she curates cross-disciplinary teams of artists, designers, and strategists to craft experiences that are not only visually arresting, but culturally attuned and built for human connection. So we talked about the work that y'all are doing in rural Appalachia. We talked about bringing dance to placemaking, which no one said when they were like, what makes a cool place? It's like the ability to dance with one another. So I want to welcome y'all up here, give them a big round of applause, and they're going to take it away. So this is on. Katie's got you here.
Hi everyone. So I want to just make it super clear. There's 3 different organizations represented here. So I'm with the Thrive Regional Partnership, Jules is with Understory, and Kathleen is with the Lyndhurst Foundation. So you will again hear from a economic and community development nonprofit, an arts organization, and a funder today. So we'll just go through. So Thrive is a 16-county regional partnership. We work really to convene really important conversations and bring capacity and resources across urban and rural Appalachia in the Chattanooga Metropolitan Statistical Area, or MSA. So we work across 3 states, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, 16 counties, and 77 municipalities. Our theme this year for us was actually brought to us by Kathleen. It's, does anyone know where this statement comes from?
Improv.
Yes, perfect. So in yes and improv, a line gets delivered and the theme is yes and keep it going. So in our work, we believe that in the region, places are what they are and they can be more inclusive, more connected, and experience greater community prosperity. So Thrive started a program back in 2016 in partnership with the Lyndhurst Foundation, and it was a 10-month, very intense program, taking us through a creative placemaking course. And there were 9 original participants in that cohort, I believe. So this is a very intense slide and doesn't typically go with the regular design that you're supposed to use for slides, but we wanted to really convey the intensity of this program. So in the original application, there was a design thinking workshop that all of the communities went through. We mapped assets. We built strategy based upon the assets that we mapped. We tested and prototyped different ideas around creative placemaking, leveraging arts and cultural strategies. We refined that strategy after the testing, went through a funding workshop to see how we can scale. We launched, and then we celebrated. So part of this program was 3 years. We included 16 communities within that across the 3 states. The original investment was $1.1 million. It was leveraged to over $2 million. We had over 1,700 volunteers, 155 different collaborative partners, and 172 artists engaged. Those numbers are low. We had a difficult time in our early days tracking that impact. So it's even larger now, and the residual community investment on the backside of a lot of these implementation projects have leveraged millions of dollars of new investment around them. So I'm going to take you through a few of our placemaking projects in more of the suburban and rural communities. We were told that there were several people here working in suburban Knox County and in rural Knox County, so we want to make sure that we are speaking to all audiences today. But also there's a lot of things we learned that take place in resource-limited, small rural communities that are very similar to disenfranchised neighborhoods in our urban cores. So we're going to start here. So this is a community just outside of Chattanooga. It takes about 10 minutes to drive from this site to downtown. This is on the Georgia side. This is Rossville. This is the town that raised me. This was a mill called the Peerless Mill at one time. It was the single largest unit producing mill in the country. It employed, at its zenith, 4,000 people. The entire community now, the population is 4,000 people. So once the mill shut down, it's the story that we all experienced across Appalachia. Once the mill shuttered, they created a vacuum, and for half a century of disinvestment. So we were approached to participate in this program. This mill is fed by a natural spring here. And this is a duck pond that sits in the center of town. And sits in front of a historic asset called the John Ross House of Chief John Ross, who led the Indians to Oklahoma across the Choctaws. So this was a duck pond that was surrounded by asphalt. It was a public park that people were still using, but it was in complete and utter disrepair. But it was the only public space that anyone was engaging in. So through our 10-month process, we met with the community, we took the meetings to where the people are, we went into the school system, we went into churches, we went into senior centers, we went into public housing developments, we went into just community centers, we went to recreation days. We really tried to get a diversification of input. And we held a really large kind of public meeting. We were expecting very few people, and we were packed out. And it proved to us that people genuinely were ready for change. So we took this asset. At the end of this program, this placemaking program, it was a $21,000 catalytic grant. And while incredibly generous, $21,000 doesn't stretch very far, right? So we took this $21,000, we went to the community, we spoke to our utility partners. They then spoke to their subcontractors. We went to local businesses. We went to local industry. And we were able to get community in-kind donations of dirt, concrete, additional supplies for watering. I mean, we leveraged every resource under the sun. This is a community, again, of 4,000 people. The city operated on a budget of $1.2 million. They put no taxpayer dollars in except for labor of public works, and that was a staff of 3. And we were able to leverage this from a $21,000 investment that we actually never had to touch to over $150 investment, this $50,000 in-kind donation for all of this infrastructure. We put all of this together with community help. So we had no professional landscape architects. We had subcontractors that helped us with the sidewalk infrastructure. And we made a partnership with a local nursery who provided all of the landscaping. We were able to leverage, as the second phase of this project, a special local option sales tax that Georgia has access to, and it's called T-SPLOST. It's a transportation special local option sales tax. I think Tennessee is really working through the opportunities to leverage that in unique ways. Georgia does a really great job of this, and so we were able to take some of that for a second phase that helped us build out and remove all of the barbed wire and just create a really special space. Around that catalyzed additional investment. We were able to bring in an artist collective, multiple new restaurants. We were able to apply for a larger Appalachian Regional Commission grant that connected this park into our downtown. And we moved almost every historic building for new investment throughout this process. The challenging piece, as most of you all know, and it's advice that was given to me when I first started this project, if there's not someone waking up every day to move this community along, it stalls. And so the challenging thing when we had to move on from this work, our positions were not replaced. And so while this community is still incredibly proud of the space and they're taking care of the space, a lot of the momentum has kind of constricted. And they're still working hard and there's people that still care. And none of this work has been in vain because it's taught people what you can do as a community to move a space or a neighborhood forward. One of the next communities that we worked in, this is a community of about 7,000 folks down in South Walker County, also in Georgia. It's called the FET. They had a building collapse on their square, and it was devastating to everyone. They weren't sure what they were going to do with the space or what they could even do with the space, and they were able to acquire it through this testing process. It was all fenced in. They have a large festival that brings in 70,000 people into their small downtown of 7,000, called the Honeybee Festival, and so they put up a sign that said, "What can this be?" And just conjured a ton of input, and we did an active community-based mural, and we went through a downtown master planning process. So we took this $21,000 Catalyst grant and went through additional planning, and they were able to leverage that into $10 million of new investment for a community of 7,000. And so they were able to acquire a DOT RAISE grant, a Safe Streets for All planning grant, and then again, the community came together, helped plant sod, created a partnership with a sod farm that was nearby. They were able to leverage this. Now they have a thriving farmer's market, a new info lot that is multi-use space right in their downtown. This is Athens, Tennessee, and part of their testing was coming into the community. They wanted to have a mill on a site. It was a vacant info lot. No one knew what to do with it, and they knew that they wanted additional space to gather and to get additional ideas and for people to have a space that was community-owned downtown, and they created a new pocket park. And so what we saw is that across the region, the lessons that we learned around our framework that we created was the peer-to-peer learning of teaching one another how to finance these projects, lessons learned of failures, of ways they could have been more inclusive into the communities, of ways that they were inclusive into the communities. We were able to scale that education across our region, across our 16 counties, so that they could learn from each other. So we're really proud of that impact. This program has since evolved into a new iteration of more focused placekeeping. So we created a resilient communities program that operates around the same 10-month framework, and it's around resiliency planning with weather-related impacts. And so we now have 9 communities across the 3 states. We're about to open a new cohort. We have a partnership with the Open Space Institute. If you're not familiar with that organization, I highly, highly would suggest that you look into Open Space. They're doing incredible work. The other components of our organization around placekeeping is we've developed something called a Natural Treasures Alliance, and it's a collective that we're building across all 16 counties of people that are very focused on placekeeping and preservation. And so this is a collective across all 3 states of people working in working lands, farms, ag, public lands, land management, and land use planning. And this is really catching a lot of steam for us, and it's become an opportunity for us to have another peer-to-peer learning impact model across the region. And a particular placekeeping, placemaking project that's pretty innovative across this working group is we had a rural county in Georgia who was having a significant transportation infrastructure issue, and they needed culverts replaced. As any of you all know that work on the public side, culverts are incredibly expensive. And for rural communities, it's one of their hardest infrastructure components to replace. So we had someone that was part of our Natural Treasures Alliance who worked in conservation, and he did some research and realized that there was a endangered species of fish that needed to pass through those culverts. And so he was able to apply for a grant to help protect this native species of fish that allowed them to have the infrastructure funding to replace the culverts. And so those are some of the challenges and projects and opportunities that we're working on across the region, leveraging our partnerships. Those of you that work in landscape, we have developed a native plant guide that lives online called Thriving Gardens with Homegrown National Park. I'm uncertain if that native plant guide scales all the way up into this region, but it does scale across our region. And we now have public entities that are leveraging this to really make significant intentional investment in native planting throughout their infrastructure improvements. And so we're really excited and proud of that. So this is just a a snapshot of what we do at Thrive Regional Partnership, but this is the programs that we've been intricately involved in around placekeeping and placemaking. And I will turn it over to Jules.
I have to stand up. Sorry guys, I'm a dancer, so I gotta move. So you're about to see a video that is like a 1-minute synopsis of some of the work I've done in Chattanooga. In 2016, I founded a nonprofit organization called the Pop-Up Project. And the reason I founded it, honestly, was because I wanted a reason to build community. And I was hungry for a regular reason to connect. And so I was like, well, I'm just gonna make an excuse. And I'm gonna create a dance company that has project-based work, because then we have a reason to get together every week, and I'm hungry for that. And so we started very small, and decided that we were not gonna have a traditional dance company because we were gonna let all kinds of dance be part of it. And so we had ballet dancers working with belly dancers, working with street dancers, and we built a shared language together. And then we started to just go out. We literally started performing on the streets with a boombox. It wasn't quite the 80s, but with a Bluetooth. And created reasons to get together and continue to show up. And I just want to say, the performing arts are so often left out of placemaking, but they are bodies in space, right? And so many of our arts organizations are holding the civic space for community where it has diminished in other places, because they give you a regular reason to get together around shared interests that then allow gathering across difference. And so I love that you spoke to that, because that was so resonant in my experience of working with dancers who looked different than me, who had different educational backgrounds, who came from different cultures and different countries and spoke different languages and had different economic backgrounds. But we built this thing together, and you're gonna see a little bit about how our city responded to it. So, thank you. You had that sappy song because that was also my retirement announcement that I sent out from the organization. But I got emotional watching that. But so there were a few parts of the organization, and I'm gonna take up for spectacle a little bit in this, because we had this regular core programming. Then we began to do work in schools. When I left, we were serving 500 children every single week with free dance education. And we opened an adult dance studio that was focused on beginner and returning dancers, because we want everybody to come dance, right? And so, but then we had these like very spectacle-based shows that we wanted to blow people's minds with. And spectacle for the purpose of awe, because the science of awe drives a direct connection between awe and surprise to empathy and pro-social behavior, right? And so there is a reason for it. So we got this incredible opportunity. We were actually, because we'd been doing these shows and making these spectacles, in 2022, we were approached by a group of developers. There's 8 developers on this project, 2 of which were focused on the affordable housing piece. And they were working on building a new community on the side of an old fabric mill. We all know the story. Had closed in 2003, was allowed to dilapidate. And what they kept hearing is, we want people to feel safe moving in, but every time we start to show and try to sell anything around here, people say, I'm not living next to that. That place is scary. And it had been the site of a lot of crime. It was, there were people squatting in there. Somebody had tried to burn it down 3 times, actually, and failed. Surrounding the mill was completely empty space. So everything that could have been torn down had been torn down for many years, and then there was just this light building. And so, can we go to the next slide? So they came to us and they said, this place is a burden. I'm gonna keep using your words, right? This place is a burden, and we need something big to help us reimagine. And I think that is the cool space of theater, which if I can get in my anthropology nerdiness for a second, is we consider that anti-structure because it takes people out of the norm and it allows them to step into a new possibility, right? And that is why the performing arts and theater are so great at helping us imagine something new. And they needed the community to see this space as something different. And so we took over the mill for 2 years, 2 consecutive falls, and we did a massive immersive event in the space. What immersive means to me is it's full sensory, and you can choose your own adventure, right? I think the word immersive is overused to the point of meaningless. But we filled it with music and dance and light and installation art and food and beverage, and we invited the community into the space to have this shared experience. Now, because we're artists and we're subversive, we also decided that it was our chance to put our values into the world. And so we made the show about moral beauty. And so all of the company members nominated people that they find morally beautiful. Now, if moral beauty is a concept from the science of awe, and it is actually the number one thing that causes awe in us. So I'm going to reference this study a few times, so I'm going to tell you who did it. His name is Dr. Keltner, The Science of Awe. Look it up, it's awesome. And he did this massive study about awe and found that 8 things cross-culturally give us awe. And the number one thing is witnessing the character, the sacrifice, the courage of other people, right? And so we thought, that's what we want to see in the world. That's what we want people to imagine. Sure, we care about the building, but that's what we want. So we interviewed people that our company members said, this person is morally beautiful and this is why. And we made the whole show about it. The results and the numbers were over those 2, so it was 4 shows total, 2 years, 8 shows. We had over 2 million social media impressions, 6,000 people came through. There were 7,000 unique posts. This was all stuff that people hired us, cared about. 21 earned local media coverage. So we needed them to reimagine the space, we had to do something big. People spent an average of 2.5 hours in the mill. There were 45 artists involved, and this is what I'm proud of, we generated $300,000 that went right back into the pocket of local artists. Okay, and that was mostly covered by developers and then also to some ticket sales. At the same time, there is a neighborhood school, and there were some concerns about the existing community and the existing neighborhood not feeling welcomed and being pushed out. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there were 2 groups focused on affordable housing. They were also working within the neighborhood to strengthen the community that was there. And so we went to them and said, how can we be part of this initiative to also strengthen the community while we're reimagining this building? And they said, well, why don't you go work with the local school? So we went in January of 2022 to the school and said, let us provide programming free to you, K through 5th grade. And they're still doing that programming. So that's 4 years later. In addition to the in-school programming, we hosted a parade that moved from the school into the mill, because I love the symbolism of that. And so the children and their families and everybody who was associated with the school marched down the street. We did these costumes. That's again a boombox, back to my roots. And we allowed them to take over the space. And they are still, again, doing that programming. There's now a little company out of that school that performs around town. And so, yeah, don't forget the performing arts. Don't forget the power of human bodies as part of this placemaking effort. And also that dance, why dance is so great for me. Dance is not a metaphor, right? So if we're talking about connection and community, and you see a dancer fall off a box into the arms of other dancers who look different than them, that is not a metaphor for trust and relationships. That is trust and relationships on display. And I think we are hungry for connection, and so we need to also allow our artists to show us that and reflect it back to us. So thank you.
Thank you, both of you, for this setup. So I work for the Lyndhurst Foundation. I believe that my task today is to give you a funder's perspective on what moves and excites a foundation potentially, or a funding partner to fund your projects. So I'm going to try and do that, but I want to give a little bit of context. So the Lyndhurst Foundation also serves the Thrive regional geography. So it's a 16 county, 3-state region that is intentional. There's a long story about that we won't talk about today. First thing to say is that I am really, really lucky and privileged that I get to be both a proactive and a reactive grant maker. So I'm going to use the example of Thriving Communities. I got to co-create and design that program with the Thrive staff. We saw a need in our communities. I, at the time, had the need to reach beyond, so I'm based in Chattanooga. I deeply, deeply care about our region and the smaller communities in our rural areas. But it's hard for me to know what is going on out there all the time. It's a big geographical footprint, and I needed a partner. Thrive became that partner. They had more boots on the ground, more experience in those smaller communities. And they needed a way to actually deliver programming in those places. So they had done a lot of researching and talking and building actually Thrive Regional Partnership, an entity. So the two of our organizations got together, created this wacky design thinking program, and honestly, it was a big sell to the boards of both of our organizations at the time, but we really believed in it because we were putting the assets of people in those communities first. So we were not talking about what wasn't there, we were building on what was, going back to the theme of yes and. We were doing that from the beginning without really knowing that we were doing it. And we were using design thinking. So we really wanted people to come together cross-sector. So it was people, Elizabeth referenced, there were initially, I think, 8 communities that applied for the program. Those applications had to be teams of people in the communities that didn't work together. So we were already intentionally creating collaborative efforts, even within communities who made an application, and then we created a regional cohort. So it was very intentionally bringing people together to not be in competition with one another. So Elizabeth also referenced the $21,000 investments. That was the carrot at the end of the stick. So we made them do this like really long, intensive work of talking to people in their communities, experimenting and iterating and shifting the approach based on what was working and what wasn't working. And then at the end, they were eligible to apply to Lyndhurst for a $20,000 grant, which most communities got to that point. And so then I had relationship with these communities that I didn't have before. So at the end of this whole process, where there were very clear benefits, as Elizabeth spoke to. Now, I get the benefit of being in relationship with Rossville, Georgia, and having a grant-making, partner relationship there with Lafayette, with Athens, Tennessee. So the Farmers Market Pavilion that Elizabeth showed, I had the privilege of being able to make a grant to help them build that pavilion. So that's an ongoing relationship that frankly helps me do my work in our community. The same as Athens, Tennessee. We've got a long relationship now. I helped them buy the building to expand the Athens area Council for the Arts building. And now they've been in a huge renovation and they're very, very successful. So I also mentioned reactive grant making, which is when people in our community see a problem and create something to fill that need. Pop-up project is a great example of that. I met Jules when she started the pop-up project and had big, great ideas. And she and her co-creator at the time, Maddie, I remember one of our first meetings, they came to me with these grand ideas and said, we want to do street art, and we need to have the funding to create video content. And you're nodding because I was like, I don't get it. But tell me more. And so we started this beautiful relationship, and Lyndhurst was privileged to help the pop-up project create some of these productions. So I wanted to highlight some of those examples because I don't have big, wonderful, beautiful slides. What I would be showing is other people's work. But the things that I wanted to really touch on are grant makers are people. We're talking a lot about people. We want to hear the people side of the story. The data is important, sure, but your story and your passion is what moves us to care. And so we also usually can tell if it's authentically rooted in community or if it's something that you've kind of come up with on your own and then you're gonna launch it into space. We tend to gravitate towards the ones that are rooted in community and that feel authentically fit a need that's there. Speaking for myself, love collaborative efforts. Jules mentioned how many artists were part of that process, but they worked with developers across sector, with other nonprofits, with the schools. Those kinds of collaborative efforts are extremely, extremely valuable. That happened with Thriving Communities, absolutely. We had designed that in at the beginning, and there was, once you start that way, there's kind of no way out. And then the other thing that I want to talk about just really briefly is experimentation. I think particularly coming from a funding perspective, I just want to say, please experiment. Please be willing to take small bites with whatever you have at your disposal to test an idea. You might have the most gorgeously wonderful, beautiful idea that if you just had $150,000, it is going to be amazing. And it probably would be. I'm more likely to fund that idea if you take a small piece and start there and test it a little bit and fix maybe or improve the things that didn't work so well, or build on that. So I think this idea of experimentation in small ways to gather information, involve your community is a little bit underrated, and from a funder, I will say, it makes a really big difference when you come to me with something that you've tested rather than an idea that is unproven. So I think I'm gonna leave it there and open, if we have a few minutes, I'll open for questions.
I have a question about the mill.
Yeah.
Thing. So we, like a lot of cities, we've got one here, right? Like old, dilapidated, nothing's really happening with it. I know there's been, people have tried and it's failed. How, since it was all, like, you moved in and did that stuff before it was fixed, was it that you all just had a relationship with the developer? Like, how did you get an okay to legally go in that building?
We were hired to do it by the developers. Sorry to make that clear, I was excited. Yeah, that was such a cool opportunity because they came to us and they were like, we've seen what you're doing all over town and how people are responding to it. And we need that kind of attention and response on our building because right now this building is a liability to the development because they were developing a neighborhood around it.
Yeah.
The mill itself is still in pretty rough shape, but there is now a fully realized neighborhood around it. And they felt like they had to build density first, and then they could attract something into the mill itself. I'm actually also talking to, I'm like, am I allowed to say this? Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody this. I'm also talking to some folks at the city of Cleveland right now who are the city is working on doing some events in their mill for a similar reason. But I think you do have to have a really good relationship with whoever owns the space, and they have to see the benefit of it.
Two questions, both about people. Kathleen, you said that most communities got the grant, but some, which I take it, some did not. And I'm curious what the difference was in the teams and the people who got the grant. I mean, to what do you attribute failure in that case? And then also for Elizabeth, I want to ask you, you said you walked away and the project is not, what it doesn't have someone waking up every day. So in terms of the people, what would you have done differently now, knowing what you know? What would you have done to cultivate that agency and that ownership in the space? So.
Yeah, so the question really was the $20,000 grant, what was successful? How did, some communities got it, others didn't. And it is about people. I think both of the answers to this probably is about people and leadership and the ability, the capacity that already exists in a community. So one town that did not receive the grant was very small, lacked any social infrastructure really at all. It was a really big lift for their community to volunteer to come to a 10-month design thinking process that was very labor intensive. And they initially had the mayor, who was also the principal of the school, involved in the program. And she was wonderful. She was a catalytic, dynamic person. She retired and dropped out of the program, and the next mayor and different person, principal of the school, just hadn't participated, weren't, it's leadership. It comes down to leadership and the physical and social infrastructure in your community. Their idea was too big to be led by volunteers, particularly once there was that leadership.
I'm trying to think how to answer diplomatically, since this will exist on YouTube. So, to be super clear, it was not because we were so great and left, it fell apart. It is because it deeply requires someone moving the needle every day. And in a community such as Rossville, they are doing the absolute most that they can. It is a mayor that runs the day-to-day operations, that mayor's part-time. The clerk of the community carries all of the heavy lifting in the water. It operates on such a small budget. It does not have a diversified tax base. It does not have staffing, and it does not have money to pay for a full-time staff member to move this forward. It also has no nonprofits working in the community interrelated to community development. It has some that are supportive services related to food security and school-based age support. It's just a challenging, small community that just doesn't have the tax revenue to float continued effort and support. With that being said, in Georgia, there's an entity called a Downtown Development Authority, and we had reconstituted this authority from its dormancy. We had a dynamic director. I am fully biased because it was my mother. and we had just an incredible group of volunteers that made up this development authority. The tough thing with this development authority is the constraints that are put on by who can make up this authority are very specific, related to a jurisdictional boundary. And in Rossville in particular, we had such significant small business constriction, and the DDA footprint jurisdictionally is just very small. And so once I was a contractor for a while, but the challenging piece is I was an investment rather than an expense, right? The grant funding, the amount of economic impact that someone, whether it was me or anyone else, getting up every day working, helped to drive all of our community engagement, continue to help drive new investment, new invigoration of young entrepreneurs coming into the community, people willing to take a risk on a very transitional suburban community. And when I could not afford to continue working at that contractual fee, or our volunteers got burnt out because we were doing some heavy lifting of half a century of disinvestment. So we created a succession plan in leading a DDA transition of a new chair and a new group. And they did a lot of great things, but the city couldn't afford to seed fund them. They had no revenue stream in the community. We were able to sell some property and had a little bit of seed capital, but it was challenging times, and then COVID hit. And so COVID really killed a good portion of that momentum. But to your point of having bullet holes, I remember when we were looking at this public park, it was a sea of asphalt, and people were used to driving around the duck pond. And people had a very challenging time wanting to replace the asphalt with grass and having it be a human-centered park rather than a car-centered park. I mean, it got scary at a few of our meetings. And then as soon as they saw it though, and it was seeing is believing, the conversation you had this morning about you can't be what you can't see, you can't understand sometimes what you haven't been exposed to. In Rossville, that was they had gotten used to tremendous blight. And I get a little choked up thinking about this because it's almost as though they felt that's all that it was ever gonna be and that's all they ever deserved. And so when they saw this park catalyze, and it was truly bootstrapped, I mean, we laid all this out ourselves. The concrete was poured by the subcontractors, but we also were over there kind of helping to build the framing for it. We had high school students, we laid this, I think the week of Thanksgiving. It was about the worst time that I saw it. So we had to get up in the cold morning and rotate, everyone had to go turn the sprinklers on and just get soaked, moving these sprinklers around to keep this sod alive. But people cared that much about this space. And I'll never forget coming kind of later in the spring, and this is an oasis surrounded by significant blight and significant disinvestment. But we had people picnicking, we had families running around, we had people sunbathing in the middle of the park. And that just wasn't happening, never happened before. But it was the it was the opportunity to show that people mattered. They mattered, Rossvillians mattered, the community mattered. They were so worthy of investment. And I think people started to really believe that, and they still do. The work hasn't stopped, it's just slowed down. And we've seen some constrictions, some of which is a lack of investment from the city in trying to figure out a way to fund even a fractional position like this, or create a partnership that can. But mostly it's because Rossville is just a challenging, has a lot of challenging infrastructure issues, and we send all of our wastewater back to the state of Tennessee and Chattanooga for treatment. Chattanooga literally controls the growth of that northern part of Walker County, Georgia. And they are a good partner, but it's limited. There's a consent decree with the EPA around some significant infrastructure issues. And so that mill has been acquired twice since we went through the Thriving Communities program. There's a developer out of Nashville that's bought it and had big plans, came out publicly with some of these beautiful mixed-use plans. And then COVID really escalated and the interest rates went up and it just bottomed out. So it's a place that still has a deep desire. It used to be a center of commerce. Everyone would come to Rossville across the Chattanooga MSA to get their dresses made, their suits made. There were cobblers there. It was such a center of retail, and it was a thriving community that was very walkable. And it's downtown, and then when they moved the schools out of the city, all the children now have to be bused out. No one can walk to their schools. And it's just, every decision in the 90s and early 2000s of poor urban design happened to Rossville. And then it was impacted by some challenging economic and trade decisions. And so, again, it has great connectivity to Chattanooga. The connectivity node from the state line of Georgia into downtown. There's people having serious conversations around Rossville Boulevard, but it's a state-owned highway. And so neither municipality has a lot of control over what can happen on that highway. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do want to reiterate that it has a lot of challenges, but the people there still deeply care about trying to create community because they remember what it once was when it was a bustling mill town. And even though it's been in dilapidation since I was born, I have the best memories of my grandmother lived in a mill house right in downtown, and we walked to the duck pond. We had a festival. I could walk to my elementary school. My 80-year-old great-grandmother came and picked my twin sister and I up from school, and we walked from my school to her house. So there's still a generation that's heavily engaged, that still deeply cares about a place, and we all have neighborhoods that are still like that. We have our suburban areas, our rural towns in Knox County that have probably seen similar fates. But I think the principle is that people are so deeply worthy of being invested in. And that's one of the things that have really come out of our Thriving Communities framework is across this region, the peer-to-peer learning to build capacity is probably our largest value. When we can introduce communities that have been through or had some failures or had some successes, it saves them time and money and heartache and effort if they can meet their peers that have really worked hard to overcome some of these challenges and been successful. And also what we found is people are so open and like ready to share, and they're not at all competitive or gatekeeping for the most part. So.
Wow, you guys, that was really incredible. It's almost it's lunchtime right now. Give it up for these three amazing change makers.